Hello everybody, welcome to number 27. I'm Jack and today I am here with this wonderful Alfa Sud Sprint. Now these are cars that in my view should have set the trend for front wheel drive cars for years to come. It didn't. We're going to find out why today. I'm also going to take it out, see if the handling is as legendary as it is made out to be, talk about why it wasn't, despite being a class leader, it wasn't as successful as it should have been, and that will also give me a chance to correct one of the most widely believed myths about Alfa Romeo and these cars in particular. Thank you to Bidding Classics for sponsoring today's video. Check out this online auction for classic cars with no buyer's fee. So for me, the Sud should have been the template that all future front-wheel drive cars followed because the design was so clever. The packaging is incredible. Even on this, which is the coupe version, I'll tell you a bit more about that in a moment, you can comfortably sit 4 adults. It's front-wheel drive, has 4 disc brakes, it has 5 speeds, but more importantly, it differs from what became the dominant design because it doesn't have a transverse engine with the gearbox underneath. This has a flat 4 engine with the gearbox behind it, and it allows it to drive and handle much better than anything at the time. Crucial to all that is the use of that flat 4 engine. Just look at how low that engine is in the engine bay. I mean, you know, the cylinder heads are almost sort of the same height as the center line of the wheels. That allows, as you can see here, a really low bonnet line, which gives great aerodynamics, but more importantly, brilliant handling. It's clearly a really clever design. So why was it that despite all its advantages, this didn't become the dominant layout for front-wheel drive cars? Well, we'll talk about that a bit more in a minute. I think it has to do with the Italianness of this car. When it first came out, the Sud was a revelation. It was a little family car, 4 people in comfort, but it handled and drove brilliantly. So it was really, really well received. That wasn't to last. But the one area, I suppose, where the Sud maybe lacked a little bit was just in the wow factor. It was a pretty tidy little design, but of course, Alfa wanted something with a little bit more appeal. And that's where the Sprint came in. So chassis-wise, it's pretty much identical to the Sud. It used a similar range of engines, but this was a whole new design by Giugiaro, the same guy who designed the Mark I Golf, the Maserati Ghibli. I don't need to go on, and it is a fantastic, really tidy design. Its main competitor at the time was the Volkswagen Scirocco. In 1980, this cost about £5,150. The Scirocco cost £200 more. A Ford Capri 2 litre was actually £200 cheaper, but both were much more successful than this, although arguably they weren't as good. Well, not even arguably. In the case of the Capri and handling and so on, and engine-wise, this was way ahead. The Scirocco had 110 horsepower, so it had a little bit more power, but it didn't handle, it wasn't as fun to drive as this. And yet, if you look at production figures, they only produced about 130,000 Sprints. And in roughly the same time period, so 1976, 1974, I think, for the Scirocco when that came out, to the late 80s, they made over 800,000 of the first series Sciroccos. And that is just crazy. Why did that car outsell this almost 8-1 when really, in most ways, this was a better car? Let's take it for a drive and we'll find out. There was a few engine options with this, but I'm not going to go into massive detail, but there was a 1.2, 1.3, 1.5, 1.7. This is a 1.5, and the 1.5s came in standard trim, i.e. this one with a single carb, and the Veloce trim. Standard trim was 85 and the double was maybe 95. In any case, it only weighs 915 kilograms, so it's not going to be a speed monster, But that's not what these cars are all about. This one has got what I think looks like a really genuine 37,000 miles. It is a unicorn. You can tell by the state of the interior and everything that it is right. I think it had been stored for many years, and Warren, who owns it, actually got a really good buy. It's just so lovely and so original. Been told apparently the steel wheels aren't quite original. They look fairly original to me, but anyway. What we all want to know about is how it drives, and then go back to talk about this issue that prevented this from being an era-changing car. The driving position is typically Italian. Legs are quite folded up. Maybe because I'm Italian, I'm used to it. The wheel is big and really dished forward as well. But it's one of those cars that, at least for me, I naturally feel quite at home in. The Vela seats, which in this car are in fantastic condition, they look comfortable, and they are. But more surprising is that because you sink into them a little bit and the Vela's quite grippy, they actually do a good job of holding you in place as well. You don't slide around, even though the bolsters don't look like they're particularly deep. There's no torque steer to speak of, and of course there's not a lot of power, but it's also helped because having that gearbox central like that means that the drive shafts are equal length, so it's much less likely to torque steer. The throttle's really progressive, the clutch is quite light, the gear change is lovely, it's really precise. It's another benefit of having that layout with the boxer at the front and then the gearbox coming almost underneath the car, is that there's hardly any sort of travel for the distance to get to the gearbox. So it's got a really good, slick gear change. Quite long, but nice all the same. Let's rev it a little bit on this junction. So that little engine pushing its little heart out. It is 85. I remember now that this is supposed to be pushing out at the crank. That feels about right. So it's not quick, but you have to really drive it, and that makes it fun even on this road, even with other cars around. I say that, and then I've got someone who's literally driving at snail's pace, and overtaking it will not be easy. Let's see if I manage to slingshot my way past these guys. Whoa! Overtaking is a bit of an adventure, but he's going so slowly that yes, no, she. Right, let's go again. And the suspension is compliant. This is a really bumpy road, so it is important that you have a car that can deal with those bumps. And oh my God, this feels so much better than many cars of that time. I think it's, you know, having that more advanced suspension. So it's got struts at the front and it's got like a watt linkage at the back. But it's so well set up. It's really well damped. The steering is lovely and light and crisp, but it's really, really happy to turn. And although you're in what seems like a sleek little coupe, the driving position isn't quite that low. So it really does feel like you're driving a normal Sud, which is no bad thing. It is just beautiful. And on those skinny tyres, it has more grip than you ever think it should do. It does lean a little bit, but not disastrously so. And it makes it, in a way, a little bit more fun in some ways, because you're kind of working with the car when it's moving around like that. So a little bit of lean is okay, as long as it's not uncontrolled lean. It's got such a distinctive personality, that flat four, that boxer engine. In a way, it kind of reminds me a little bit, just only a little bit, of some of the air-cooled Fiat twins, the 2CVs, in a totally different way. Way more power, way smoother, way revvier, but it's got that thrummy feel to it. And this thing, just honestly, it's so good round the corners that, I don't know, it's just brilliant. I think perhaps it's because it's an older car, you don't expect that much from it, but I can understand why at the time people must have been absolutely blown away by this. You can imagine driving something equivalent at the time, say an Allegro, and you could not get that down this road in any shape or form at the same speeds that you can this. And it's just beautiful. That engine is so smooth, 5,000 RPM. Just keep it there, and it feels so happy at those revs. You do have to keep the revs up. So, oh. It clings on, even on that really tight left-hander. It really does cling on. Now I can see it looks like there's no petrol, which is slightly worrying, but I think perhaps it's the sprightly cornering and the old gauge which is responsible for that. Okay, time to do the second pull on the way back. Now there is one thing about these. Ooh. 0 to 60, even for the Veloce version, which I think has another 10 horsepower, it's only about 10 seconds. So look, it's not quick, but it's a joy pedaling it. It really is. Brakes are, I don't know how good they'd be in terms of fade and stuff, but the pedal's firm, which is reassuring, and they feel okay. They feel pretty good, to be quite honest. For the time, they were supposed to be very much class leading. Discs all round in a car which is so light. Oh, just chuck it in. It is brilliant. It's brilliant. It's brilliant, and it thoroughly encourages you to do it as well. It's kind of telling you, go on, push me through this corner. Carry a bit more corner speed. Oh, it's beautiful. It's beautiful. This car is absolute proof that you do not need to have power to have fun. What a beautiful thing. Throttle response, so once it gets going, it's good. Throttle response isn't quite as immediate and crisp as I was expecting. I think that's because this is the single carb version, so it sits above the engine and it has some really long intakes. I believe that the twin carb versions are a little bit snappier, as well as having a bit more power. The interior is quite charming now, but I have to say you can feel the sort of Alfa cost cutting. It does feel pretty fragile. One of the incredible things is that trying to work out the heater controls, you basically wouldn't be able to. So the heater, the fan control, is on this lever here. You've got the horn and you've got the wipers, but if you pull it down, then it starts the fans for the heating. Why not have it here, for example, where all the rest of the heating controls are? That's just mental Alfa of the time. Italian, crazy Italians. I don't know why on earth they did that, but ergonomically, it is terrible. So look, this car is absolutely brilliant. It's got space, it's well packaged. Okay, maybe the interior quality isn't up to much, but it deserved to do incredibly well. And this and the Sud should really have changed front drivers. It drives so much better than any front driver of the time. And yet they didn't. This wasn't hugely successful. As I said, the Scirocco, which had the traditional transverse layout, did way better, whilst being a car which is in nowhere near as good to drive as this is. And as most of you suspect, the reason is rust. What you don't realise is why that rust happened. So the traditional story is the Sud was hampered by a terrible reputation for rusting on the forecourt. You get it home after a week, rust would come through, and that is absolutely true. And it also affected this version, the Sprint. But a big fallacy, and one that I believed, even when I did the last video on the Sud that I drove, is that was caused by the Italians using recycled Russian steel. And that is absolutely no true. You know, there's no truth to that whatsoever. That story came about because Fiat sold the tooling for the Fiat 124 to Russia, or to the Soviet Union at the time. And for some reason, it seems mainly the British press, got this story that in exchange for that tooling, the Russians paid with steel. That isn't true. They paid in oil. Where this factory was, which was in Naples, basically, by the coast of Italy, there was also a massive steel factory at the time, the biggest steel factory in Europe. It was government owned, as was Alfa Romeo. There's absolutely no way that Fiat would have bought would have taken steel from the Russians, or the Italians would have taken steel, when they already had overcapacity and they had a factory, a plant right next to this factory. So I have done a whole video on this and I'll put a link at the end, but to cut it short, the reasons why these rusted so terribly badly, nothing to do with Russian steel. It was because they were built so badly. So that new factory in Naples, it was staffed by peasants who'd never built cars before. They also just took time off whenever they felt like it because they had to pay bribes to get those jobs. And because when they had to harvest their olives or whatever, well, they just wouldn't turn up at work. There were the usual problems with sort of the unions in the 70s as well, which meant that there were frequent strikes anyway. So bodies were left out in the open, they were badly built, they were left sort of half done in the ovens, and they started to rust even before they arrived. It is really sobering and interesting to think that for me, this layout could have really had a huge impact on car production, and it didn't, just because these particular cars, which were so amazing in every other way, they were just so terribly built. And it is a shame, because it is, trust me, the Sprint is amazing. It is a great, great little car. Thank you all so much for watching. If you have a classic car that you would like me to do a review on, then please do get in touch, either on Instagram or by email. If you haven't subscribed, please do. Thank you all so much for watching, and I really look forward to seeing you for the next video.